The certified letter felt heavier than a tombstone. My hands trembled, not from the Boston cold seeping through my apartment window, but from the embossed logo of Avum Therapeutics. Inside wasn't a severance check. It was a declaration of war, a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Defamation, they called it. My personal blog post, the one detailing CEO Alistair Finch's doctored clinical trial data for a drug meant to save lives, had cost me my career. Now he wanted to bleed me dry, to bury me in legal fees until the truth was just a forgotten whisper. He thought firing me was the end. He thought a lawsuit would be the final nail. He was wrong. This wasn't an ending. It was an education. My first lesson began 10 years ago in the gleaming lobby of Avum. Alistair Finch wasn't some distant monster in a penthouse office. He was my mentor. He spoke of changing the world, of a legacy built on scientific integrity. I was a senior biochemist, 32 years old, and naive enough to believe every word. He had this disarming charisma, a way of making you feel like you were on the cusp of curing the incurable. The change was subtle, a slow poisoning. The focus shifted from breakthroughs to bottom lines, from patients to patents. I remember him saying once, over expensive scotch, a chilling smile on his face, "Elias, perception is Pertu's reality. The story we tell the market is more important than the data in the lab." At the time, I dismissed it as cynical corporate banter. I didn't realize it was his core philosophy. The man who spoke of saving lives was a phantom. The real Alistair Finch was a predator who saw human beings as decimal points on a quarterly report. And I had just made myself his primary liability. He wasn't just suing me, he was trying to erase me. The drug was called AT488, our moonshot, a novel protein inhibitor aimed at halting the progression of a devastating neurodegenerative disease. On paper, it was the miracle we'd been chasing for a decade. The Phase 2 trial results Alistair presented to the board were flawless. Too flawless. That was the first thread I pulled. It was 2 a.m., the lab silent, except for the hum of the servers. I couldn't sleep. The numbers felt wrong, like a perfectly composed song with one sour note you can't quite place. So I went back to the source, not the polished summary reports, but the raw, messy data logs from the clinical sites. I started cross-referencing patient codes. And then I saw it. Patients who had experienced severe side effects, neuropathy, cardiac events, were recoded and dropped from the final analysis. Their data wasn't just omitted, it was scrubbed, marked as non-compliant, for trivial reasons. The successful results weren't a miracle, they were a meticulously crafted fiction. Alistair hadn't found a cure, he'd just buried the failures. I printed everything, the damning discrepancies highlighted in yellow, and walked into his office the next morning. My hands were shaking again, but this time with rage. I laid the papers on his glass desk. He didn't even flinch. He just leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Elias," he said, his voice calm, paternal. "You're seeing trees. I'm looking at the forest. We're on the verge of an FDA approval that will save this company and fund research for a dozen other cures." "By lying?" I shot back, my voice dangerously loud. "By putting a dangerous compound on the market? These numbers, this is fraud, Alistair." He gave me that same chilling smile I remembered from years ago. "It's perspective. And right now, your perspective is becoming a problem." He stood up, walking to the window overlooking the city. "I gave you a career, Elias. Don't make me take it away. Go back to your lab. Forget what you saw. This is your only warning." That wasn't a warning. It was a threat. I walked out of his office, the world tilting on its axis. The mentor was gone. The monster was real. I knew what would happen next. HR would get a call. My keycard would be deactivated. The evidence would vanish. I had maybe an hour. I went back to my terminal, my heart pounding against my ribs. I wasn't a hacker, just a scientist who knew the system architecture. I bypassed the standard user interface, accessed the root server, and started a transfer. The complete, unredacted datasets. The doctored reports. Incriminating internal emails from Alistair. Everything. I dumped it all onto a single encrypted thumb drive that felt like a tiny grenade in my palm. Walking out of that building for the last time, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a ghost. That night, with the lawsuit now feeling inevitable, I opened my laptop. I had no platform, no power. Just a personal blog with 17 followers. It wasn't much. But it was all I had. I started to type. The blog post, titled "The Price of a Miracle," didn't break the internet. It caused a tremor, not an earthquake. It was enough to get me fired. It was enough to trigger the lawsuit. But it wasn't enough to make a difference. Industry forums labeled me a disgruntled employee. Avam's PR machine spun a narrative of a failed scientist lashing out. My 17 followers couldn't compete with Alistair's army of lawyers and publicists. The lawsuit papers were designed to break me. Discovery motions, depositions, subpoenas. A blizzard of legal jargon meant to bury me in paperwork and debt. My savings evaporated. Friends from the industry stopped returning my calls. I was an island, and the tide was coming in. The thumb drive in my desk drawer felt less like a grenade and more like a dud. Evidence is worthless if no one is willing to look at it. I had one last gambit. One person I thought was untouchable by Alistair's poison. Dr. Lena Petrova. My second in command in the lab. She was sharper than me. A data purist who saw the same anomalies I did. We'd shared late-night coffees, cursing the pressure from the executive floor. She knew. She had to. I sent her a message from a burner email. North Point Park. The pier. 3 p.m. Please. She came. The wind off the harbor whipped her scarf across her face. She looked worried, her eyes darting around as if expecting Alistair's security to emerge from the mist. "Elias, this is insane," she whispered, huddling close. "They're monitoring everything, my emails, my calls." "I know," I said, my voice low. "I'm not asking you to go public. I just need a confirmation." An anonymous tip to the right journalist. "I have everything, Lena." I tapped the breast pocket of my coat, where the drive was nestled. The original logs, the emails from Alistair. It's all here. If you corroborate the data, they can't ignore both of us. I was betting my entire future on the trust we'd built over 5 years in the trenches of research. I saw a flicker of the old, defiant Lena in her eyes. A spark of hope ignited in my chest. Then she took a small step back. The distance felt like a mile. "He promoted me, Elias," she said, the words flat, devoid of emotion. "Your job. Director of Biochemical Research." The spark in my chest died, replaced by an icy dread. "What?" "He showed me your blog post before it was even 24 hours old," she continued, her voice hardening. "He called it a loyalty test. He said the department needed stable leadership, someone who sees the forest, not just the trees." She was quoting him. She was quoting the monster. My blood ran cold. This meeting wasn't a clandestine alliance. It was reconnaissance. "I have 2 kids, a mortgage," she said, as if reciting a script. "Bravery doesn't pay for braces, Elias." "I'm sorry." She wasn't sorry. She was secure. She had made her choice, stepping over my professional corpse to take her seat at the table. "Does he know you're here?" I asked, my voice a hollow echo of what it had been moments before. "He knows I'm handling a personnel issue." A faint, cruel smile touched her lips. Alistair's smile. "He asked me to find out what you were planning next, and to see if you were foolish enough to bring the source material with you." My hand instinctively clutched my coat pocket. Betrayal wasn't just a quiet turning of the back. It was an active, predatory strike. I had walked into a trap, armed with nothing but a naive faith in a colleague. She turned to leave, her scarf trailing behind her like a victory banner. "Just give it up, Elias. You can't win. He's already won. Watching her walk away, swallowed by the gray Boston afternoon, I realized Alistair's true genius. It wasn't in cooking the books or charming investors. It was his ability to find the price of a soul. His ability to find its price tag and purchase it with a promotion, a title, a sense of security. Lena hadn't betrayed me. She'd been acquired. I stood there on the pier, the wind a welcome, biting shock against my face. I expected a wave of rage to crash over me, or the cold tide of despair. Neither came. Instead, a profound, unnerving calm settled in my bones. The final piece of Alistair's puzzle slid into place, and I saw the full picture with horrifying clarity. He hadn't just fired me. He hadn't just sued me. He had been systematically dismantling my world, testing my defenses, probing for weaknesses. The lawsuit wasn't the main attack. It was the anesthetic, designed to numb me and hold me still while he performed the real surgery, excising the truth from reality. Lena was the scalpel. She wasn't sent to turn me. She was a diagnostic tool, sent to confirm what he already suspected. My hand tightened on the thumb drive in my pocket. My last, desperate gambit, and I just advertised it to the enemy. Now, he knew for certain the grenade was real. In that frozen moment, I understood my fundamental mistake. I had been playing chess, meticulously trying to prove he'd made an illegal move. Alistair wasn't playing chess. He was just burning the board. He wasn't trying to win a court case. He was trying to win my time. Time to push AT488 to the next milestone. Time to inflate the stock price so high that the inevitable fall wouldn't destroy him. Time to bury me so deep in legal mud that by the time I surfaced for air, he'd already be on another continent, counting his money. A low, dry laugh escaped my lips, startling a gull on the railing. It wasn't a sound of humor. It was the sound of something breaking free. The naive scientist who believed in rules and evidence was gone, left behind in the harbor mist. My education was finally complete. You don't fight a plague by reasoning with it. You don't defeat a predator by appealing to the humanity of its puppets. You fight it by destroying its habitat. The lab had been his kingdom. The stock market was his ecosystem. I had been trying to stage a coup in the castle. It was time to burn the fields. I turned my back on the water, the ghost of my former life sinking beneath the waves. The man who walked off that pier wasn't a victim anymore. He was a hunter. And he knew exactly where to aim. The walk back from the pier was different. The city's noise, which once felt like an oppressive weight, was now just background static. My focus had collapsed to a single burning point. Alistair had made this personal. Now I was going to make it terminal. My apartment, once a sanctuary, was now a command center. I didn't bother turning on the main lights, working instead under the stark glow of my laptop screen. The lawsuit papers sat in a neat pile on my kitchen table, a monument to a battle I was no longer fighting. I was abandoning that front entirely. My enemy wasn't Evum Therapeutics, the institution. It was Alistair Finch, the man. And his lifeblood wasn't science. It was capital. His power was a house of cards, built on investor confidence and a soaring stock price. My blog post, my attempts to appeal to the FDA, that was like trying to complain to the architect about a crack in the foundation. The new plan was to bulldoze the entire structure. For 3 days, I didn't sleep. I consumed caffeine and lived on the internet, but I wasn't reading scientific journals. I was studying a different kind of predator. I dove into the murky world of activist short sellers. These weren't just investors betting against a stock. They were hunters. They found wounded companies bloated with lies, took a massive short position, and then published meticulously researched reports exposing the fraud, gutting the stock price for their own profit. They were corporate piranhas. Unethical? Probably. Amoral? Absolutely. But they were the only force I could find whose motives were as pure and uncomplicated as Alistair's greed. One name kept appearing, whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in financial forums: Marcus Thorne, the founder of Cerberus Analytics. Thorne wasn't just a short seller, he was a narrative assassin. His firm didn't just release data, they crafted stories. They took complex fraud and distilled it into a simple, brutal, and viral narrative that investors and the media could easily understand. His reports were legendary for their accuracy and their savagery. He was Alistair's shadow self, a man who also believed perception was reality, but who weaponized it to tear down, not to build. He was perfect. Getting to Thorne was the problem. Lena's betrayal confirmed I was under surveillance. My digital life was a glass house. Any email from Elias Vance would be flagged, intercepted, and used against me. The thumb drive was my only leverage, and if Alistair knew I was trying to give it to Cerberus, he'd escalate. He wouldn't just sue me, he'd find a way to have me arrested. He'd paint me as a corporate terrorist, trying to manipulate the market. I needed a ghost. I left my apartment at dawn, dressed in nondescript clothes, a baseball cap pulled low. I left my phone and wallet behind, taking only cash and the thumb drive, now wrapped in layers of aluminum foil inside a hollowed-out book. It was paranoid, but I was learning. I took 3 different subway lines, crisscrossing the city, before ending up at a branch of the public library miles from my neighborhood. The library's public computers were old and slow, but they were anonymous. I created a new Proton-encrypted email account under a meaningless name, Cassandra88, a nod to the Trojan prophetess, cursed to speak the truth and never be believed. It felt fitting. I opened a new message. The recipient, a public-facing tip address on the Cerberus Analytics website. I knew this inbox was likely flooded with thousands of crackpot theories and desperate pleas. My message had to be a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I couldn't send the entire drive. That was reckless. It was my only copy, my life insurance. I needed to send a single, undeniable piece of proof. Bait so potent, the shark would have no choice but to bite. I spent an hour combing through the drive's contents, looking for the perfect hook. Not the complex trial data that would take them weeks to verify. I needed something simple, direct, and damning. And then I found it. It was an email chain from Alistair to the head of our data management team. The timestamp was 72 hours before Evam's Q3 earnings call, the one where he first announced the overwhelmingly positive Phase 2 results that sent the stock soaring by 40%. His email was chillingly direct. It contained a list of 16 patient ID numbers, the same numbers I'd found scrubbed from the final report. Alistair's message was a single sentence: reclassify these subjects as protocol non-compliant due to dietary deviations, and regenerate the efficacy summary before tomorrow morning. We need a clean narrative for the call. It was the smoking gun. It wasn't just evidence of scientific fraud. It was a direct, written order to manipulate data for the express purpose of misleading investors. That was securities fraud. That was the language Marcus Thorne understood. I attached a screenshot of that email chain. No other files. Then, I wrote the body of the message. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my voice cold and precise. 2. Cerberus Analytics, subject, AEVT, the price of a miracle. You don't know me, you never will. I was a senior scientist at Avum Therapeutics. I was there when they buried the bodies in the data for AT488. Their blockbuster drug is built on a foundation of fraud. The attached screenshot is a direct order from CEO Alistair Finch to falsify clinical trial results immediately prior to an earnings call. The 16 patient IDs referenced correspond to subjects who experienced severe adverse events, including neuropathy and cardiac episodes. Their data was erased to create the illusion of success. This is a small taste. I have everything: the complete, unredacted trial logs, the doctored reports. Internal communications. A full record of the fraud from inception to the present day. Alistair Finch is lying to his investors, to the FDA, and to the public. He's not selling a cure. He's selling a story. And the bill is about to come due. If you are interested in the full story, publish a post on your public blog within 48 hours. The title must be a single word. Intrigued. Nothing more. If I see it, I will establish a secure dead drop for the complete data package. If I don't, you will never hear from me again, and this evidence will go to your competitors. The clock is ticking. I read it over once, then twice. It was arrogant, demanding, and dangerous. It was perfect. My hand hovered over the send button. I felt a strange sense of peace. The gambit was made. The message was in the ether. All I could do was wait. The 48 hours that followed were the longest of my life. I didn't dare touch my own computer or phone. I became a ghost in my own apartment, pacing the floors, the silence broken only by the city's distant hum. It wasn't the panicked waiting of a victim hoping for rescue. It was the focused stillness of a sniper who has already squeezed the trigger and is waiting for the sound of the impact miles away. Alistair's lawsuit, the threat of ruin, it all felt like a relic from another man's life. My world had shrunk to a single question. Would the shark take the bait? On the second day, 47 hours after I'd sent the email, I repeated my pilgrimage. The same nondescript clothes, the same cash-only journey, the same circuitous route to a different library branch across town. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the cold calm of my mind. This was the moment. Either my new war began, or my old one ended in absolute defeat. I sat at the terminal, my fingers slick with sweat. I typed in the address for Cerberus Analytics. The blog page loaded, a cascade of financial analysis and market commentary. And then I saw it. At the very top, a new post, published just 1 hour before. There was no text, no summary, no image, just a title, a single word. I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued. It glowed on the screen, a beacon in the digital darkness. A wave of adrenaline surged through me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. He'd seen it. Thorne had seen it, and he believed it. The beast was hungry. Now I had to feed it. I didn't go home. I went to a cheap electronics store in a rundown strip mall and bought a burner phone with cash. Then, I went back to the library. My next message had to be precise, a set of surgical instructions for delivering the payload. I couldn't risk a digital transfer. Alistair's people were almost certainly sniffing for large data packets coming from anyone connected to me. It had to be physical. It had to be a dead drop. I opened my Cassandra 88 account and began to type. Subject, AEVT, the price of a miracle, good. The full data package is on a single drive. You will retrieve it under my terms. Nimes tomorrow, 11 a.m. sharp. Go to South Station. Find the public lockers near track 13. The key for locker C47 will be taped to the underside of the water fountain nearest the entrance to the men's restroom. You will have a 10-minute window to retrieve the key and the package. Come alone. My associate will be watching. If you are followed, or if we spot any surveillance, yours or theirs, the drive will be remotely wiped, and this channel will be closed forever. Do not reply. Your only confirmation will be an empty locker. I reread the message. It was a lie, of course. I had no associate. I had no way to remotely wipe the drive. But Thorne didn't know that. I was building a new perception, a new reality. The reality was a desperate man in a public library. The perception was a coordinated, professional operation. In Alistair's world, that's all that mattered. I hit send. The next morning, the city was draped in a cold, unforgiving rain. It suited my mood. The thumb drive, my tiny grenade, was in a plain manila envelope in my coat pocket. I arrived at South Station an hour early, my baseball cap pulled low, my face obscured by the collar of my coat. I didn't go near the lockers. I just melted into the chaotic flow of commuters, another anonymous face in the crowd. I was a ghost watching my own haunting. At 10:50 a.m., I walked calmly to the designated water fountain. My hands didn't shake. I knelt as if to tie my shoe, my back to the main concourse. In one fluid motion, I pressed the small, cold key, wrapped in a piece of black electrical tape, to the cool porcelain underbelly of the fountain. It stuck. I stood up and walked away without a second glance. I went to the far end of the station, bought a coffee I didn't drink, and stood behind a concrete pillar. I watched the clock on the main board. 11:02 a.m. A man in a tailored but unremarkable gray suit walked with purpose towards the restrooms. He was average height, average build, his face forgettable, he didn't look around. He paused at the fountain, bent to drink, and when he straightened up, he casually wiped his mouth with his hand. The key was gone. He walked to the lockers, and a moment later, walked away, an envelope now tucked inside his suit jacket. He disappeared into the crowd. It was over in less than 90 seconds. I didn't wait for confirmation. I just walked out into the rain, a ghost returning to his mausoleum. For 5 days, silence. The lawsuit papers on my table seemed like artifacts from a forgotten war. The only thing that mattered was the weapon I had launched into the world. On the 5th day, a Tuesday morning, the burner phone buzzed. A single text from an unknown number. It was just a link, no message, no signature. I clicked it. The page loaded, Cerberus Analytics. The report was titled, Avum Therapeutics, a Case Study in Pathological Deceit. It wasn't data, it was a vivisection. Thorne had taken my evidence and forged it into a narrative blade, surgically gutting Alistair's legacy. He published the email. He named Lena. He detailed the cardiac events and the scrubbed patient data, calling AT-488 a poison packaged as a panacea. He didn't just present the facts, he told the story, framing Alistair not as a misguided visionary, but as a predator who knowingly gambled with human lives for profit. My hands were shaking as I opened a financial news site. AEVT was a waterfall of red. The stock had opened with a 70% loss before trading was halted. A banner at the top of the page announced the FDA was immediately suspending the AT-488 trial, citing, quote, credible evidence of data falsification. My personal email pinged. It was my lawyer. The subject line was just my name. The message inside was 5 words. Avum's counsel just withdrew everything. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen, at the frozen stock ticker, a monument to Alistair's ruin. His empire, built over a decade, had been demolished in less than an hour by a single blog post. Not my desperate plea, but one written in the language he understood, savage, unapologetic capital. On the news, they showed footage of Alistair leaving his brownstone, his face a mask of panicked fury as reporters swarmed him. The charismatic mentor was gone. In his place was a common criminal, exposed and cornered. The world finally saw the monster. It wasn't just revenge. It was an exorcism. The truth hadn't set me free. It had burned my prison to the ground. The victory felt absolute. But as I watched Alistair shove his way into a waiting car, I knew this wasn't the final act. I had won the war for the truth. He was about to start a new war, one with no rules at all. So I have to ask, where do you draw the line between loyalty to your company and doing what's right?